324 BC. 324 BC, the Battle of Opis. The reason Alexander was addressing his men this particular time was not what you might think if you don't know this story. Alexander and his men had been on campaign for many, many years at this point. They had conquered much of the known Western world. And it was during this period, in particular, that after conquering so many nations and winning so many battles, Alexander's men were starting to become emotionally fatigued. They wanted to get out of this. They had grown tired of campaign. So they had derived a mutiny. Not necessarily to overthrow Alexander, not to overthrow Alexander, in fact, at all. They planned to retreat. They planned to, instead of moving forward into the next battle, they were all going to pack up their shit and leave and go home. Now, Alexander found out about this. Now, what would you do? Think about that, guys. What would you do if you were, at the time, arguably the most powerful man in history, and you just found out that half of your army is about to desert? What would you do? 27 at that, a young man. What would you do, right? Well, let me tell you what Alexander did before the Battle of Opis, when his army was loading up their gear to go AWOL and leave. So what did Alexander do when his army decided to abandon his campaign? Did he have them all hanged? No. Cut their heads off? No. No, he didn't do anything like that. So what did he do? Well, he approached his men. He approached his men and he basically said something like, before you go, I'd ask that you just hear me one last time. Let me speak to you one last time. I'm not going to stop you, but hear me out. I'm going to read you some of the speech, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. He said, "The speech which I am about to deliver will not be for the purpose of checking your start homeward, for, so far as I'm concerned, you may depart wherever you wish, but for the purpose of making you understand when you take yourselves off what kind of men you have been to us who have conferred such benefits upon you. In the first place, as is reasonable, I shall begin my speech from my father Philip. For he found you vagabonds and destitutes of means, most of you clad in hides, feeding a few sheep up the mountainsides, for the protection which you had to fight with small success against Illyrians, Trebellians, and the border Thracians. Instead of the hides, he gave you cloaks to wear, and from the mountains he led you down into the plains, and made you capable of fighting the neighboring barbarians, so that you were no longer compelled to preserve yourselves by trusting rather to the inaccessible strongholds than to your own valor. He made you colonists of cities, which he adorned with useful laws and customs. And from being slaves and subjects, he made you rulers over those very barbarians by whom you yourselves, as well as your property, were previously liable to be carried off or ravaged. He also added to the greater part of Thrace, to Macedonia, and by seizing the most convenient situation places on the seacoast, he spread abundance over the land from commerce and made the working of the mines a secure employment. He made you rulers over the Thessians, of whom you had formerly been in mortal fear. And by humbling the nation of the Phocians, he rendered the avenue into Greece broad and easy for you, instead of being narrow and difficult. He continues to go on. He's basically explaining things that him and his soul and his campaigns and his father's campaigns have done for all of these men. He basically goes on to continue to explain to them, you know, he's saying, in other words, most of you were poor, most of you were slaves, most of you were nobodies fighting in this war. He basically continues to say, you know, I've made you rich. I've made your families rich. I've made you live beyond your name. I've made you heroes through history for all time. I have set you up for life and your families for generations. And then this is where it gets really good. He says, I have no motive to guard men, since I feed on the same fare as you do, and I take only the same amount of sleep. Nay, I do not think that my fare is as good as that of those among you who live luxuriously. And I know that I often sit up at night to watch for you, that you may be able to sleep. But some may say that while you endured toil and fatigue, I have acquired these things as your leader without myself sharing the toil and fatigue. But who is there of you who knows that he's endured greater toil for me than I have for you? Come now. Whoever of you has wounds, let him strip and show them, and I will show mine in return. This is the best part. And this is the part I really want to talk about. He says, for there is no part of my body, in the front at least, which does not bear a wound. Nor is there any kind of weapon used either for close combat or for hurling at the enemy, the traces of which I do not bear on my person. More importantly, and most importantly from that entire speech, there is no part on me, well, the front at least, which does not bear a wound. Alexander just basically called his entire army a bunch of fucking pussies to their faces. What did he mean by that? There is no part on my body which does not bear a wound. What he's saying is, go ahead, cowards, run. I hear you're talking. I hear what you guys are saying. You're saying that because I'm the leader, that I'm reaping of all the spoils, and I'm not suffering the same hardships that you're suffering. And yet here I stand before you as all of you want to run away, and I have never turned my back on a battle. That's why there's no part on him which does not bear a wound, at least, well, on the front. So, one of Alexander's greatest speeches and greatest moments in history is telling his entire army, fine, go. I'm not going to stop you. If you want to run away from war, if you want to run away from the battle because you think that you have it so much worse than me, let me just remind you that, in essence, what he's saying is, let me just remind you that unlike other kings of our time, I lead from the front line. And that's true. Alexander and his companion cavalry were in combat. They were in the battles. He fought tooth and nail beside his men. There is no part on me, well, the front at least, that doesn't bear a wound. What made Alexander such a great leader? That right there. That moment. Those messages. He led his men not with a whip from the back, but with a charge from the front.